Nicholas Brown worked as a night porter at a small hotel on the outskirts of the city, a lonely shadow among the empty streets. He didn't hate people, not exactly. He just couldn't understand them. Social isolation and Asperger's syndrome had pushed him toward an unusual hobby. He installed hidden cameras in several hotel rooms. Watching guests through the screens became his way of studying emotions and human behavior. One evening, a young woman named Sophie checked into the hotel. She moved like someone carrying an invisible weight. Her dark hair fell across her face, and her tired eyes darted down the hallway as if she feared meeting someone. Room 308. Nicholas instinctively memorized it. Late at night, when darkness blanketed the hotel and even the usual ambient noises faded, Sophie was still in her room. The camera showed her sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching an old leather bag. Her hands trembled, her gaze fixed on the door. It felt as if something terrible was already on the other side. At precisely midnight, Nicholas saw her door creak open. At first, it was subtle, as though nudged by the wind. Then, a dark figure appeared in the doorway. A man in a long coat and hat stood motionless, like a statue come to life. The camera couldn't capture his face. It was swallowed by shadow. Sophie froze. Her breathing grew heavy, like someone standing at the edge of a precipice. "What are you doing here?" Her voice wavered like a snapped string. The man entered the room in silence. His movements were painfully slow, unnaturally so, as if he relished every second of Sophie's growing terror. Nicholas stared at the screen in horror. His fingers gripped the edge of the desk. He had to do something. But what? Call the police? If he did, the cameras would be discovered. On the monitor, the scene grew more horrifying. The man grabbed Sophie's arm, shoving her against the wall. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened in a scream Nicholas couldn't hear. The cameras had no sound. Sophie struggled to break free, but the man was too strong. He threw her to the floor and pulled a gleaming knife from his coat. The camera captured every gruesome detail. The blade descending, tearing through her dress, leaving crimson trails in its wake. Sophie fought back, clawing and kicking, but her movements grew weaker with each passing moment. When it was over, the man leaned over her motionless body. He took the knife and began carving something into her chest. The camera couldn't pick up the finer details, but the mark resembled an ancient symbol, one recognizable only to those who studied the occult. Before leaving, the man turned to face the camera. His face remained hidden in shadow, but a chilling smile curled at the corners of his mouth. He knew someone was watching. Nicholas couldn't tear his eyes away from the screen, even after the room fell silent. His body shook, and his heart pounded violently in his chest. He knew the body would be discovered in the morning, and the police would question everyone. But what if the killer already knew about him? What if he was next? Morning at the hotel erupted in chaos. Detectives had arrived, and the crime scene turned into the epicenter of an intense investigation. Police cars filled the parking lot, their red and blue lights casting eerie flashes on the hotel's facade, amplifying the atmosphere of dread. Guests whispered nervously in the lobby, stealing glances at the officers. The hotel staff, though expected to carry on, looked rattled and uneasy. Nicholas Brown was summoned to an improvised interrogation room set up in the hotel's storage area. He sat at a table, his fists clenched to hide their trembling. Across from him sat two detectives. Jared Holt, a tall man with a severe face and piercing eyes, led most of the questioning. His partner, Sarah King, observed Nicholas intently, catching every subtle reaction. "Were you working last night?" Holt asked calmly. "Yes," Nicholas replied, avoiding eye contact. "What exactly were you doing? Did you notice anything unusual?" Holt's tone remained steady, but his questions probed like a scalpel. I was mostly at the reception desk. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary," Nicholas said, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "You seem nervous, Mr. Brown," King remarked, leaning in slightly. "Are you sure you're not withholding something? It's all so shocking," he stammered, his explanation unconvincing. After the interrogation, The detectives exchanged knowing glances. Their suspicions about Nicholas only deepened. Back in his storage room, surrounded by the monitors displaying the hotel's security footage, Nicholas felt trapped, like a rat in a maze with no exit. He knew the recordings could expose the crime, but they could also ruin him. As he began reviewing the footage, his breathing grew shallow, each click of the mouse feeling heavier than the last. The video showed the stranger entering Sophie's room. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but the pace quickly escalated. Nicholas's stomach churned as he replayed the harrowing moments. Then he noticed something unusual. In the faint light streaming through the curtains, a tattoo became visible on the man's right shoulder. A snake coiled around a dagger. It was unmistakable, glaringly obvious when the man leaned over his victim. The symbol felt eerily familiar, but Nicholas couldn't place where he'd seen it before. The tattoo felt like a key, yet it unlocked nothing but further dread in his mind. As Nicholas sat transfixed before the screen, he heard the soft creak of a door opening. Footsteps approached. It was Andrea, a new guest who had checked in that evening. Her sudden presence startled him, though her demeanor seemed calm, almost too calm. Andrea's expression was light and friendly, but Nicholas sensed an undertone he couldn't quite decipher. She mentioned a problem with her room's air conditioner and asked for his help. She smiled, stepping closer and leaning in slightly as she spoke in a soothing tone, almost unnervingly so. "You'll come take a look, won't you?" she asked. Her voice was calm, almost disarmingly so. Nicholas didn't respond immediately, the tension in the room thickening. His thoughts spiraled back to the tattoo, the man on the footage, and a smile that felt horribly familiar. Finally, he nodded, trying to mask the fear clawing at him. "Sure, I'll check it out," he said, his voice hollow. Andrea lingered for a moment longer, her eyes fixed on his face, as though trying to read him. Nicholas felt as if a dark truth was coiling around him, suffocating him like the snake encircling that dagger. The next night brought an even greater nightmare. Just a few hours after Brown had shut off the cameras and slumped into his chair, trying to collect his thoughts, he heard the storeroom door creak open. For the late-night shift, this wasn't unusual, but the sound was unnervingly quiet, sending a chill through him. He grabbed the remote and began scrolling through the live feeds on his laptop. At first, everything seemed normal. Empty hallways, a few unused storage rooms. But as he fast-forwarded, his heart stopped cold. The body of his coworker, John, the receptionist, lay in the storeroom. His eyes and mouth had been sewn shut with black thread. It was as if some unseen monster had decided to strip him of any chance to scream, though that opportunity had long passed. His skin was pale, with his face already taking on a bluish hue. Brown's nerves tightened like a vice, but he couldn't look away. The footage captured every horrifying detail. Andrea's figure silently drifted down the hotel corridor several times, her steps barely disturbing the shadows beneath her. Brown involuntarily noted how her footsteps echoed faintly in the empty halls, as though the building itself was unwilling to acknowledge her presence. Brown realized, with growing dread, she was everywhere. Shifting his focus from the surveillance feed, he checked his email on the laptop. His fingers shook as he saw an unfamiliar message. The subject line was blank, and the text inside was chillingly brief. "I see you. You know more than you want to." Brown's pulse quickened, his breathing shallow. Who could have sent this? It could only be one person. The same stranger whose chilling presence on the footage still haunted him, or someone from the shadows of his life who knew far too much. But it didn't end there. A new email appeared moments later. This one was even more sinister. "You can't hide from yourself. The cameras will fail, and this will be your final night." Brown frantically opened the video files again, his stomach sinking as he realized some of the footage was missing. Blank frames replaced key moments, leaving only disjointed fragments, like flashes of a nightmare attempting to escape the confines of time. There was no doubt in his mind. Someone was controlling the system. Someone was playing a dangerous game with him. The incomplete recordings resembled a shattered mosaic, each fragment teasing at a larger picture of horror that refused to come into focus. Every missing piece whispered that Brown had to brace himself for whatever came next. The killer knew he was watching and had turned this into their game. At that moment, Brown understood he was trapped. Whatever was happening, he couldn't leave the hotel. It wasn't just his workplace anymore. It was a battleground for his sanity and his very soul. And then he heard footsteps again. This time, they came from just beyond his empty room, growing louder with each step. He froze, his finger hovering over the pause button on his laptop. The hotel hallway was frozen in the stillness of early morning when a kitchen staff member discovered Simon's body. The young man, a longtime employee of the hotel, had been found in the first-floor storeroom. His hands were tied behind his back, and his eyes and mouth were crudely stitched shut with black thread. His body lay in an unnatural position, like a marionette discarded by its puppeteer. Blood on the floor formed eerie patterns, thin lines creating strange symbols that spread beneath the faint glow of a flickering light bulb. The news of the murder spread rapidly among the staff, triggering a wave of panic. Police arrived swiftly, taping off the storeroom with yellow crime scene tape. To most, it seemed like just another inexplicable act of violence. But Nicholas Brown saw something more. Simon had always been reliable, punctual, and easygoing. The previous evening, Brown had seen him on the cameras in the hallway, sorting through a box. It had seemed completely routine, except for one detail. A shadow had flickered in the frame as Simon bent down. Indistinct, almost spectral, it darted near the storeroom door. Brown rewound the footage, trying to make out more. But as always, the camera seemed to lose the critical moments. This time, however, something did appear. For a few seconds, the recording captured a stranger dressed in dark clothing. While the police meticulously combed through the crime scene, Brown tried to maintain his composure. Andrea appeared again, this time under the pretense of discussing hotel security. She exuded an unsettling sense of control, as if she already knew how everything would end. "This is getting dangerous, isn't it?" Andrea asked, slowly glancing around as Brown avoided her gaze. Her voice was too calm, too casual for the gravity of the situation. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, his voice nearly faltering. "Really?" She leaned closer, and Brown felt a cold sweat break across his skin. "Then why do you look so scared? You know more than you're letting on. What did you see on those recordings, Nicholas?" She knew. Her words, her tone. Everything about her told him that Andrea understood his fears, knew exactly what he was trying to hide. That night, as the hotel sank into an oppressive silence, Brown returned to the cameras. But this time, something was different. The files began vanishing before his eyes. He frantically tried to stop the process, but the system was unresponsive. Just before the final recording disappeared, the face of the killer appeared on the screen. It was the same man from earlier, the shadows clinging to his features, and his neck revealed that ominous tattoo once more. "You're next." Read the text that suddenly flashed across the screen. Brown shot out of his chair, his heart pounding so violently it seemed to echo through the empty hotel. Instinctively, he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to find the killer standing behind him. But the office was empty. The silence that had once been his sanctuary now felt unbearable. It pressed in on him, invading his ears, making every creak and whisper a threat. And then Andrea appeared in the doorway. "Are you okay?" Her voice brimmed with curiosity. Suddenly, Andrea entered the office, and Brown felt his blood run cold. Her calm voice and icy gaze were like a trap tightening around him. He knew she wasn't just some random woman. Her role in all this was far darker than he'd initially thought. "Nervous, Nicholas?" she asked, settling into the chair across from him. Her fingers drummed leisurely on the desk. "You know who he is, don't you?" Brown tried to steady himself, but his hands trembled as he motioned toward the monitors. "He's a local psycho, a hunter of sinners. But why are you here, Andrea? What's your role in this?" Her smile widened, triumphant. "My role? I give him what he wants, the game. And you, Nicholas, are a part of it." At that moment, the office door creaked open, and a man with a tattoo on his neck stepped inside. It was him, the killer. His cold, empty eyes locked on Nicholas. "Well, it's time for the final act," the man said, his voice thundering in the small room. Instinctively, Brown backed away from the desk, searching for an escape. But Andrea was faster. She blocked the door, shedding any semblance of friendliness. "We want you to write your own story," she said, her voice a blend of menace and amusement. "You'll be the star of our collection." The killer pulled a phone from his pocket, showing a video of past victims. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but the terror was unmistakable. They had fought desperately to the end. "They were all sinners, just like you, Nicholas," the killer said. "But you're special. You'll be my masterpiece." Brown bolted for the door, slamming his shoulder into it. He sprinted down the dark hallways, not daring to look back. But every corner he turned, his face reappeared on the monitors. The killer was toying with him, savoring the hunt as he followed with a knife in hand. Andrea caught up to him at the stairwell, grabbing his collar and slamming him against the wall. "This isn't an escape, Nicholas. It's part of the show," she hissed, her voice devoid of emotion. But Brown broke free and dashed toward the service elevator leading to the basement. The old lift creaked as it descended. His heart pounded in his chest, the metallic scent of blood already filling his nostrils. When the doors opened, he froze. The basement was a macabre gallery. Walls lined with crime-scene photos and videos, tools smeared with dried blood, and bodies partially concealed under tarps. He spotted the camera control panel and quickly activated it. The monitors now displayed Andrea and the killer descending toward him. He knew his time was running out. As they entered, Brown slammed the heavy metal door shut behind them. "You think this will save you?" Andrea shouted, pounding on the door. Brown slumped against the panel, weak from the knife wound in his side. Blood pooled around him as he recorded a final message for the police. "Their faces, their crimes, it's all here. Don't let them get away," he whispered, pressing the send button. His vision blurred as he heard the banging on the door grow louder. Minutes later, the door gave way, and Andrea and the killer burst into the room, their faces twisted with fury and sadistic delight. "Think you've won?" Andrea sneered, leaning close enough for him to feel her breath on his cheek. "No one's coming to save you, Nicholas. You're just another trophy for our collection." The killer knelt beside Brown, his bloody knife gleaming under the flickering light. "You need to see this before you die," he said, pulling out photos of previous victims. "They all thought they could escape. Now you'll join them." Brown tried to stand but collapsed back to the floor. The killer struck him hard in the chest with his boot, pinning him down. "Let's make this one memorable," Andrea said, handing scissors to the killer. He began slicing through Brown's shirt, leaving deep scratches on his skin. "This is just the beginning," Andrea said coldly, snapping photos with her phone as if documenting art. Brown's screams echoed through the basement but were drowned out by the sound of metal slicing flesh. His body convulsed in agony, but his eyes refused to show fear. Even in death, he wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As the killer delivered the final blow, blood splattered the walls and floor. Brown lay still, another addition to their grotesque collection. But unbeknownst to them, the police were already closing in. The data Brown sent had led officers to the hotel. The screams and the live feed from the cameras became their guide. The basement door was blown open, and armed officers stormed inside. The killer lunged with his knife, only to be shot in the shoulder. He collapsed, writhing in pain. Amid the chaos, Andrea seized her chance. Grabbing a bag of phones, she disappeared through a service exit, vanishing into the night. Though the killer was captured, Andrea remained at large. Her face, recorded on countless monitors, became the centerpiece of the case, but her whereabouts were unknown. The hotel was permanently shuttered, its halls haunted by memories of those who never made it out alive. Subscribe to the channel, hit like, and let us know in the comments if you think you could escape this hotel. And remember, sometimes behind a calm smile, real evil is lurking.